Hello everybody. In today's video I want to show you a bit of the pattern where woke culture takes us from university to the real world. But before I do that, I would like to talk to you about power, because all these people want is to acquire power. And we know that how governments acquire power. They do it through trying to take away your discretionary income capabilities. Basically meaning, how does the government acquire their power? Because we can all agree that the more money you have, the more power you have. It gives you power to start a business. It gives you power of mobility, moving from state to state, province to province, country to country. It gives you power to buy the things you want to buy, whether it be materialistic or any other way. But these woke ideologues, whether they stem from intersectional academia or critical theory, well, how do they acquire this power? Was by dividing the population into sections or into identities, different identities. And it becomes a sort of oppression Olympics. Who's the most oppressed? So it could be by race, it could be gender, it could be sexual orientation, but everything has to be divided by identity, by what you could identify as. This is basically the basics of intersectionality and critical theory. Well, intersectionality also, to make it more easily, to explain it more easily, it's basically that there does not exist any absolute truths. Whether it's scientific truths, mathematical truths, that these are all social constructs. This is basically their theory, the postmodern theory. For anybody that's interested in understanding more about these ideologies, for people that like to read, well, I have a few suggestions and recommendations for you to read. You can start off with this book called Explaining Postmodernism, Skepticism and Socialism from Rousseau to Foucault. Rousseau and Foucault, we can call them the founding fathers of postmodernism and intersectionality. It's written by Stephen Hicks. It's basically the best book out there to understand what is postmodernism, including intersectionality. Even though they're not exactly the same, but this is a good basis to start understanding it. Another one is written by evolutionary psychologist Dr. Gad Saad, that resides here in Montreal and is a professor at Concordia University. And it's called The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense. This is more of a broader explanation about these ideas and how dangerous they are in our society. In the same, basically the same mindset of this one, there's also The Madness of Crowds, Gender, Race, and Identity by Douglas Murray. This one also is in a broader aspect, explaining how the mob mentality of it, aspect of these ideas, and how they become even more dangerous when they're in the middle of a mob mentality. Thus the title, The Madness of Crowds. And if you really want to dive deep into critical theory and its ideologies in university, basically anything that has to do with critical race theory, gender studies, fat studies, and yes, fat studies is a real course in university. And it's called, this probably breaks it down the best. It's called Cynical Theories, with the word critical scratched out. And it's called Cynical Theories, How Activist Scholarship Made Everything About Race, Gender, and Identity, and Why This Harms Everybody. It's written by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. So these are the books that you can, if you want to if you like to read, and if you want to really dive deep into what are these ideologies and how dangerous they can be in the real world. For people that are not too big fans of reading, I would suggest the Jordan Peterson podcast that came out today, January 15th, with guest Dr. Gad Saad. And Jordan Peterson, for you that don't know, he's a clinical psychologist that's on a sabbatical leave from University of Toronto, also from here in Canada. So if you go look on Facebook, Jordan Peterson podcast, Gad Saad, you should be able to find this conversation. It's a 2-hour conversation, and they go into all these ideas of and all these ideologies in depth, and they explain it pretty well. So if you're more of a visual person and you don't like to read too much, I suggest you go look up that video. It will explain to you pretty well what these ideas are. Okay, so now let's start the video, the purpose of this video. And how the pattern goes from university ideas from academia, if you will, into the real world. But first I want to talk about Legault, Premier Legault. Even though people that have been following me, whether on Facebook or on YouTube or have been watching videos, knows I'm not the biggest fan of Legault. But in a world where we are, I think, at least since I'm alive, where we are most polarized, I think it's important to note that you could agree with somebody on one subject, but agree with him on another. I think that's what we need more of this life in society right now, is to have conversations with people you disagree with. Because a lot of the times you're going to find things that you do agree with. And I think that's important. And Legault this past weekend, finally, he stood up and spoke out against the woke culture here in Quebec. And I think he did it a bit cowardly because I think he found it more politically advantageous, because the French president, Emmanuel Macron, spoke out about it firmly the past week. So let me show you a bit of what President Macron and Premier Legault said. So reported in the New York Post, the French are absolutely right to say no thanks to US wokeism. It's an American export that prudent Europeans want to keep out. They've paid close attention to the product's development in the United States, and they've determined that it's toxic. They are afraid it will damage their kids, undermine their society, and threaten civilization. I completely agree with all those three affirmations. It will damage kids, undermine their society, and literally threaten civilization. Okay, and it continues. No, it's not genetically modified food or Velveeta or McDonald's. It's woke American scholarship on race, and frankly, the Eurocritics have a point. French President Emmanuel Macron and his ministers view the threat as existential. As the New York Times reported, they think wokeism fuels, I have a problem saying this word, but successionism. I think I said it wrong, but anyways. It gnaws at national unity, abets Islamists, attacks France's intellectual and cultural heritage. Again, I completely agree. Academics, though, they disagree, of course. But that's no more of a surprise than seeing manufacturers of synthetic cheese stand up in defense of Velveeta. The truth is, the woke race theory that has been expanding its influence in the United States in recent years has done a lot of harm, spread a lot of division, and contributed to a worsening, not an improvement in race relations. Again, I completely agree. So, and I continue. But the current flavor of anti-racism, as scholar John McWhorter writes in his book, The New Elect, to be specific, John McWhorter is an African-American professor at Columbia University. So this is not a white old man speaking. is in fact a neo-racist construction designed to admit of no excuses or explanations. Guilt is assumed from the beginning. McWhorter writes, the revelation of racism is, itself and alone, the point, the intention of this curriculum. As such, the fact that if you think a little, the tenets cancel one another out is considered trivial. That they serve their true purpose of revealing people as bigots is paramount. Sacrosanct, as it were. He adds, all of this supposed wisdom is founded in an ideology under which white people calling themselves our saviors make black people look like the dumbest, weakest, most self-indulgent human beings in the history of our species, and teach black people to revel in that status and cherish it as making us special. So, for academics, playing word games, this is fun. For gangs of woke students or Times employees who have managed to cancel a series of the paper's top writers recently, it can produce a feeling of enormous power and self-importance. So it says it right there. And I'm happy for the French population in France that their president is standing up against this woke culture. Now let's see what Premier Legault had to say about this. So this is reported in the CBC. Okay? And it's titled, Legault lashes out on social media at radical activists, under quotations, because it's the CBC, vows to defend freedom of expression. So he said in his statement this past weekend, our universities should be places for respectful debate, debates without censorship, for truth-seeking, even if the truth can shock and provoke, the Premier wrote. Professors are being asked to remove the works of some of our greatest writers, like Anne Hébert, Régent Ducharme, Dany Laferrière, or Pierre Vallière. It's absurd. Legault indicated that Minister of Higher Education, Danielle McCann, is working to find solutions to this issue, but he did not specify what measures are being considered at this time. So he goes on to say, talk about what happened in this past fall at the University of Ottawa, where a teacher was censored, intimidated, and bullied to not talk about certain books. And some students were triggered by a word that I will not mention in those said books. So if you want to know more about that controversy, you can go look up University of Ottawa controversy, and a scandal or controversy, and it will pop up on your Google feed. So now I've explained to you how finally how governments in Western civilization in the West are starting to wake up to the problem and the dangers of what woke culture is and these ideologies. So now let me show you the pattern where it goes from university to the real world. So here, Amir Attaran, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, who is a professor of law at that said University of Ottawa. He writes about Premier Legault, unethical premier who helped slay 10,000 of his citizens with a deadly disease suddenly finds moral epiphany in the N-word and slamming a university outside his province. He goes on and he puts the link to the article I just read, you guys. He goes on to say, very surprisingly, Legault chose the word radical to describe people who oppose racism, which is remarkable when the law in Quebec makes racism illegal. There's also a term for people like Legault, white supremacist. So Legault can be many things, but he is not a white supremacist. And he says here that he used the word radical to describe people who oppose racism. That is totally false and an outright lie. Like I just read you, he never even mentioned people that oppose racism. So these are the type of professors that are indoctrinating your children or your young adults in university. Okay? And now, these students of these university professors, they go out into the real world. And in some cases, they become principals or teachers at elementary and high schools. And these these are the documents they send white parents. So the principal of East Side Community School in New York sent white parents this tool for action, which tells them they must become white traders and then advocate for full white abolition. So this is the new language they're using for public education. Imagine 1 second if the roles were reversed, and it would be documents they're sending black parents, calling them to become black traders and for them to advocate for black abolition. The outrage that would cause, and rightfully so, because that is the pure definition of racism. But I digress. So they sent out this document that says it's the 8 white identities. Okay, and it goes from the most radical, the red part, to what they call the most acceptable version of white people. So it goes from white supremacist to white voyeurism, white privilege, white benefit, white confessional, white critical, white traitor, and white abolitionist. Now what is this? What are these identities separately? Yeah, I'll read you it. So the 8 white identities by Barner Hesse, or Hesse. There is a regime of whiteness, and there are action-oriented white identities. People who identify with whiteness are one of these. It's about time we build an ethnography of whiteness, since white people have been the ones writing about and governing others. So 1, if you're the most radical white person, you're a white supremacist. Clearly marked white society that preserves, names, and values white superiority. Number 2, white voyeurism. Wouldn't challenge a white supremacist. Desires non-whiteness because it's interesting, pleasurable. Seeks to control the consumption and appropriation of non-whiteness. Fascination with culture. Example, consuming black culture without the burden of blackness. Number 3, white privilege, which they say is the biggest... The majority of white people have they're number 3. White privilege may critique supremacy, but a deep investment in questions of fairness, equality under the normalization of whiteness and the white rule. Sworn goal of diversity. Number 4, white benefit. Sympathetic to a set of issues, but only privately. Won't speak, act in solidarity publicly because benefiting through whiteness in public. Some people of color are in this category as well. So some people of color, if they don't think the way these ideologues want them to think, then a person of color can actually be a white benefit, of white benefit. Number 5, white confessional. Some exposure of whiteness takes place, but as a way of being accountable to people of color after. Seek validation from people of color. Number 6, white critical. Take on board critiques of whiteness and invest in marking the white regime. Refuses to be complicit with the regime. Whiteness speaking back to whiteness. Excuse me. Number 7, this is where they want you to be and eventually get to. White traitor. Actively refuses complicity. Names what's going on. Intention is to subvert white authority and tell the truth at whatever cost. Need them to dismantle institutions. Right? And number 8, a white abolitionist. Changing institutions, dismantling whiteness, and not allowing whiteness to reassert itself. So there you have it. These are the documents that schools are sending white parents so they could self-identify and realize that they are one of these things, no matter what they say or the way they act. Okay? So now we've seen how these students from these activist professors go into the real world when they become teachers and principals in the K-12 school system. Now I'll show you what happens when they become activists in in human resource departments in institutions and big corporations. So we have here Douglas Murray in the Telegraph It's an English newspaper in England, where he actually tried one of these unconscious bias trainings, which, by the way, have just reported in our media here in Quebec that CBC has this training for its employees, unconscious bias training. So Douglas Murray here actually did one of these unconscious bias trainings at the company KPMG. Okay, and this is his this is how he tells the story of what it was. The stated aim was to show that prejudice and stereotyping exist, that we are not always aware of it, and that we need to break old habits. For instance, we are told that we are likely to promote people who feel greater sympathies with, and that it is wrong. A case study is offered. A person who is qualified for a role and another person who is a friend of yours and isn't qualified apply for the same job. Who should you promote? You will be amazed to hear that the correct answer is not your mate. Well, everybody knows that a good leader or a good businessman will never do that. Yes, some people under him, some supervisors might do it, but they have nothing to gain in the company's success. So yes, those people might favor friends or something like that. But the owner of the business, the businessman itself, or the leader will never act like this, because they wouldn't last long as businessmen or leaders. But the real point is to push the diversity agenda. We are told that unconscious bias impairs diversity, and that a diverse and inclusive workforce is essential for hiring top talent, fostering creativity, and guiding business strategies, which ought to make the United Nations the most efficient organization in the world. I like his comparison, because we always know how efficient the United Nations is. All this and more was simply asserted, never proved. Because as you do the test, it becomes increasingly clear that this is not education, but re-education. Now, does that remind you of anything? Re-education. I can't go any further because I might be banned from YouTube or from Facebook for making this comparison, but you people might understand what I'm talking about when I talk about re-education. I was warned that when it came to promoting women, I may make the wrong choice because in your culture and upbringing, you've learned that the woman is the maternal figure. Elsewhere, we are warned that we might have a bias in assuming older people know more than younger people. Well, yeah, because experience does give you more knowledge and wisdom. But I digress. Happily, there are a range of ways to overcome all these outrageous notions. You'll be surprised that the first is invest in training. All staff should have training in unconscious bias so that they know what to look out for. This training should be for everyone. The core values everyone will then have are clear. We are encouraged to say them out loud. One chant is, I desire a workforce where everyone is equal and diverse. So there it is. A ready-made ideology with ready-made slogans to make you ready for the era. All it costs you is work, time, money, and self-esteem you might have had before being made to submit. So, I just want to read you the second to last paragraph again. You'll be surprised that the first is invest in training. All staff should have training in unconscious bias so that they know what to look out for. So once they do this unconscious bias training in corporations and institutions, then you have the unintended consequences of the next article I'll show you. So this was from City Montreal, okay? And I got to give credit to Melina Jubilaro. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Jubilaro, which is a very good reporter from City News. And she put out a story, I think 2 weeks ago, about a foster, a couple that wanted to foster a child, and they were refused from Laval because they were Anglophone, which already is pretty bad. But this one's even worse. So Laval couple told they can't foster because Center doesn't need any more Caucasian families. Excuse me? I'm flabbergasted by the racism in that. But I'll continue reading for you guys. So Kimberly Suero contacted City News after seeing Amanda and Emmanuel's story. Suero was told she wasn't eligible either. This is her, and I quote, "I will quote her because these words for the rest of my life will never leave me. In the past, we have accepted families to foster for Batshaw from Laval. However, at the time being, we are so saturated with Caucasian families that we have no need to look further for them in other boroughs. What we really need are black families and Hispanic families. We don't need Caucasian families." So now you see how these students that spill out in the real world and go work at these institutions like this foster or adoption centers, and that they have to put out this racist ideas, and they refuse a child to go into a loving family because of the color of the skin of that loving family. Imagine for a second, like I said before, if this was a black couple that were being refused to foster a child because they were black. Once again, it would be all over the news, and outrage would be everywhere, and rightfully so, because these are racist ideas. I know some people will say, "Oh, reverse racism doesn't exist." No, racism is racism. I know that they like to change the language because language is power. And don't forget that, again, comes back to power. So they want to change the fact that reverse racism, which doesn't exist. Either you're a racist or you're not. Go look up the definition of racism. I know in some cases they actually are trying to change the definition of racism, but we all know what racism is. Is when you think you're superior to another person because of the color of your skin or their skin, or their race or your race. We know that is the definition. So these are the unintended, and I'm speculating that it's unintended because maybe it is intended. As we see, these are not stupid or unintelligent people that are pushing these ideas. These are professors in universities. So they can't be that dumb. So maybe it is conscious. They're actually doing this intentionally. Okay, now I'd just like to show you a quick thing of what are they sending, what are these ideologues sending teachers for them to teach, to change their ways of teaching math in grade 6 to 8, which is for people here in Canada, or especially here in Quebec, it's grade 6, secondary 1, and secondary 2. So it's called a Pathway to Equitable Math Instruction, Resources and Guidance to Support Black, Latinx, and multilingual students to thrive in grades 6 to 8. I'll just read you a quick certain parts of this document. Excuse me. So how can I facilitate deeper understanding? The focus is on getting the right answers. So it says, number 1, engage. White supremacy culture shows up in the math classroom when the focus is on getting the right answers. So asking your students to get the right answers, in math in this case, is just racist. Right? So, let's go on. Another part I'll read you. Critical praxis. So what is praxis? Is a Marx term, Karl Marx, which is the father of communism. So the Communist Manifesto, if you want to go read his ideas, basically it's a good way to start in his Communist Manifesto. So praxis is Marx's term for applying theory. So this is critical theory, basically. Pure, what we've learned, what we can learn in this book, what it is. So, shifting toward anti-racist math education. What's anti-racism? You could also, if you want, get this book from Ibram Kendi, which is basically I was going to use the word godfather, but the guru. I rather use the guru. It's more applicable to Mr. Kendi here. The guru of anti-racism. So basically his idea is you either racist or you're anti-racist. You cannot be a non-racist person. That doesn't exist. Racism is everywhere, so you're either racist or anti-racist. So this is where they got these ideas from. So if you want to understand what these people are teaching, this is also good material to read. So, shifting toward anti-racist math education. Teachers, in order to shift your practice toward anti-racist math education, it is necessary to critically examine the ways in which white supremacy culture permeates your own math classrooms. These exercises are designed as a year-long process of reflection and planning in order to identify the ways in which your practice may perpetuate white supremacy culture and create a plan for dismantling it using anti-racist approaches. So each month you will complete a set of exercises as outlined in the calendar. You will complete a 5-step cycle as follows. 1. Engage with the ways that white supremacy culture shows up in the classrooms. Reflect on your current classroom practices to identify the ways in which they perpetuate white supremacy culture. Plan to dismantle white supremacy culture by creating a goal that incorporates specific anti-racist practices. Act with accountability by carrying out the plan. And 5, reflect on the ways in which your practices align with anti-racist math education. So basically, no word of math here. It's just basically, through math class, teaching your students their ideology and pushing their dangerous rhetoric. Okay? So, white supremacy culture shows up in the math classroom when expectations are not met. This is a classic example of either-or thinking. If parents don't show the characteristics of what I think a good parent is, then that parent is bad. If students don't show the characteristics of what I think a good student is, then that student is bad. Sorry. If students don't show the characteristics of what I think is a good student, then that student is bad. This thinking creates meritocracy in the classroom. Students have to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and if they fail, it is their fault. It does not give room for the systemic reasons students fail, which often lie in problematic expectations. So basically what they're saying is, minority students cannot succeed with merit, which that is racist in itself. Okay? Let's go for another one. So, incorporate a more robust course selection process that allows for multiple perspectives, including student, parent, current, and previous teachers, advisors, and others who might also have relevant information. For professional development, challenge the notion that if a student did not pass one course, they will not be successful in the next course. See, math is taught in a linear fashion, and skills are taught sequentially, without consideration of prerequisite knowledge. For administrators and leaders, create a process to ensure that you are intentional about meeting the criteria of Senate Bill 359, Chapter 508, Statutes of 2015, known as the California Mathematics Placement Act of 2015. So go look that up, and you'll just see how crazy that is. Okay? Another example. White supremacy culture shows up in the math classroom when state standards guide learning in the classroom. While in public schools, our professional responsibility is to teach with the standards in mind, it is also our duty as anti-racist educators. Not as educators or mentors for these students, especially grades 6 to 8, but they have to be anti-racist educators. To unpack how the standards uphold white supremacy culture, a hyper-focus on standards requires teachers to function under a system of urgency to cover all the material that will be on the test and not focus on actual learning. See, the problem with all this is that sometimes they're in their crazy ideas or solutions to the problems they see, sometimes there is a real problem. And like this fact right here, that all the material that will be, that they have to, an urgency to cover all the material that will be on the test and not focus on actual learning, there's actually a basis of truth to that. But their solution is just, I have to be careful what I say. We'll just say it's crazy. Okay? So let's go to another one. Another example. White supremacy culture shows up in math classroom when procedural fluency is preferred over conceptual knowledge. Though many educators value conceptual knowledge, we often assess and test skills rather than concepts, solidifying the notion that skills are more important. Okay, so we all understand that knowledge is important because knowledge is the key, right? That's something, can I say this? A saying that I like to say is that ignorance is bliss, but knowledge is the key. And we all understand how important knowledge is. But learning skills is also very important. And many people, university is not made for everybody. So that's why you have a lot of these students that shouldn't even be in university, taking these useless humanities courses, and that will probably end up working at Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, and that will probably have a $30,000 to $50,000 student debt. No wonder they're asking to abolish student debt, because they go to university and take these useless courses and degrees, and then think they're going to get a job in real life, even though there are some jobs, like I've shown you, in human resources departments and institutions and stuff like that. Not everybody will be qualified. So these courses are so easy to pass that, sorry to say, the dumbest people will be able to pass these courses, but won't be able to get a job derived from these courses. So skills are important in some cases. There's nothing wrong in being a plumber or an electrician or a mechanic. These are proud, how can I say? These are proud departments in which people go into. There's nothing wrong with doing those jobs. We all need these people. These people are very useful in our society. So you see where they conflict knowledge and skill. That's also how they use their ideology and rhetoric to get power, is by pushing things against each other. Like if knowledge and skills are contrary to each other, they're not. They complement each other, and they complement society. The ones with knowledge and the ones with skills. Do I show you another one? Okay, let me show you a last example of that document. So how am I authentically including Black, Latinx? First of all, Latinx. It's already proven through surveys that actually Latin people, Latinos, hate that term and don't like to be called that term. Yet white woke ideologues continue using it. So after a group of people tells you they don't like to be called that, and you continue calling that because it pushes forward your ideology, then who's the bigot and intolerant and racist? I'm asking you guys. So by continuing to privilege data analysis and probability over other kinds of spatial patterning, even if that data analysis concerns itself with issues such as climate change, we run the risk of limiting new ways of doing mathematics and our relationships to the practice. So this was written by Guy Therese in 2017, that is not even has no degree in mathematics. Her name is Rochelle Guiterres. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but it's Rochelle, Rochelle, Guterres, Gutierrez. Look her up. You'll find this document that she wrote. At all, nothing to do with math, no degrees in math. And she has this idea of revolutionizing mathematics. That she actually puts an X. So at the end of mathematics. Who'd figured? So good math teaching is considered an antidote for mathematical inequity for Black, Latinx, multilingual students. superficial curriculum changes are offered to address culturally relevant pedagogy. Pedagogy. I often mix up my French and English. Sorry, guys. And practice. So basically, this is the basis of postmodernism. That there is no absolute truths. That there's no scientific truth and no mathematical truths. So that means when you're using data to show patterns in why people act a certain way, that in itself should be abolished. Because then you can prove stuff like, for example, if you listen to Thomas Sowell, another African-American intellectual, he will put all these data out that the problem, a lot of these problems in the black communities, and this is not me saying, it's him, because me, I'm white. I shouldn't be talking about this, but this is his work. And he's an African-American, so he should be allowed to point out these problems. A lot of these problems, yes, some are institutional, but most of them come culturally. That's what he says. Look it up. Thomas Sowell. All the ideas are there. And many other black American intellectuals like Glenn Laurie, John McWhorter, what's his name? Coleman Hughes. These are all African American intellectuals that stem from the world of academia and are pushing back against this way of thinking, which they think is dangerous, not only for the population in general, but especially for the black population in the Western world, if you will. So basically what they're saying is that data analysis and mathematics should be revamped completely, because these things shouldn't be seen as universal truths. So folks, I just showed you of how dangerous this woke culture is, and how it stems from universities and then spreads to the real world, and how it's starting to affect your kids' schools and your jobs. So guys, I would ask you to not be quiet about this. If you receive these documents or documents that are likened to these ones, stand up, call your schools, complain, call your politicians. Don't stand for these people trying to divide us by identities, by race, gender, or whatever. We are one human race. And we should learn and judge each other on our character, and not by dividing us through identities, to our identity, whether it be race, gender, or whatever, or ethnicity. We must learn how to live as one. This is very important, and I really do believe in what I'm saying. This is not political. I know people might see this as political and they're like, I don't care about politics. This is not politics. This is real world. And it's very important that I don't want to live, at least, in a dystopian future. Do you? I really doubt it. So people, don't censor yourself. Stand up when you see these things at your work or at your children's school. Don't let it go. Speak up. Because maybe if more and more people speak up, maybe there'll finally be a pushback, and these people can back up a bit. Because by us being silent, then these people feel emboldened and galvanized, and they will continue to push even crazier rhetoric and even crazier measures. So folks, this is what I wanted to show you today. This is my plea to you. Stand up. It's important for us, for the present, and for our children and the future. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you soon. Peace out.